What guardrails is your government going to put in place to help navigate this relationship so that we do not suffer as a result of more trade with China?
You're never just getting China's money. If you're just getting China's money and nothing else, China would not make that deal with you. One of the reasons I started this channel is because after living in Canada and working Canadian media for years, I've noticed something that genuinely worries me. Many Canadians and people in the middle powers in general really do not have a necessary clear understanding of China, the country that I was born and raised in. Most people in the West, and Canada included, understand that China is an authoritarian regime, but the information pretty much stops there. People that are blessed enough to live in a democracy all their lives do not care or understand how conniving, how dangerous the Chinese Communist Party can be, and how much they actually underestimate the power of the Chinese Communist Party. Most people think as long as they do not live in China, they're safe from the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. And it's unfortunate. It's simply not true anymore. I recently became a Canadian citizen, and that got me to think what it really means to be a Canadian citizen. What are Canadian values? And I truly hope that doesn't just mean that we're different from the United States. I hope that being a Canadian truly means that we stand up for democracy and we do everything we can to protect the interest of all Canadians. As a China watcher and a Chinese dissident, I truly believe the effort on countering the rise of an authoritarian China should be really bipartisan. And one of the tactics that the Chinese Communist Party uses to destroy its opponents or enemies in their eyes is very simple, and that is divide and conquer. So the best way to resist the Chinese Communist Party, which is in the interest of all of you who live in a democracy, is to actually unite and say no to the authoritarian regime when it's necessary to do so. At the center of this China-Canada relations, I think there are three areas that people mostly agree or disagree on. First of all, there's the economic benefit, and that is the trade and tariffs. And a critical question for that is, are we really diversifying, or are we just jumping from one superpower to another superpower and make us dependent on a worse country to rely on?
So you've just explained the actual dilemma here, which is dependence and the risks of being dependent. And it seems like that's part of the, I don't know, I'm going to use the word naive again. I'm not sure whether I should, but we don't want to just trade off dependence on one country for dependence on another. If we're worried about our relations with the US and only having one customer, it would be a lot riskier if China grew in its importance, which is what Prime Minister Carney seems intent on doing.
This talk that China is the second largest trading partner isn't very meaningful. I mean, the European Union is a much more important trading partner.
Right.
Britain is a comparatively important trading partner to China. It's not far behind, right? So it's not the aggregate total that is the issue. It is a sectoral and a company by company problem. If you allow any particular sector to become overly dependent on China, then the business people in that sector end up aligning their interests with the Chinese Communist Parties and become lobbyists on its behalf anytime the party chooses to weaponize that relationship, as it did with canola, pork, other agri-food products, seafood.
And
recently.
This is not the first time that China has imposed tariffs, going on for decades.
Yes, that's right. It uses trade and investment, for that matter, as a political weapon. Hence, it's the same sort of strategy one might give to an investor, right? Canada began to sell over 75-80% of its canola to China, a single customer. Would you put 75% of your savings in one stock and hope it does well? I mean, that's not adequate diversification, right? And so you need to diversify your trading partners. And if you can't find enough buyers for that much canola, then you need to diversify the crops you grow. tomorrow. That's one of the key things that needs to happen. My concern and what Canadians need to watch is not the total percentage of trade with China. It's which sectors and companies are too dependent on China and how are they behaving within Canadian politics? Because is what they're seeking in the interests of the Canadian public and our national security? I mean, this deal now did a wonderful thing for prairie farmers who can now once again sell their canola. But I hope they at least learn from that experience and scale back and just use this window to buy time, to temporize, to rebalance their trading partners and open up new markets elsewhere. And this is a risky game that the Prime Minister is playing in doing that.
Now, I understand a lot of people might think that this is unnecessary. I've even seen people say that we just want China's money, we want their cheap products, that's all we care about, we're fine. As someone who was born and raised in China, I had to say that's not possible. You're never just getting China's money. If you're just getting China's money and nothing else, China would not make that deal with you.
Now, with letting these cars into Canada, I wonder whether we're not letting a wolf into the henhouse, not just economically, but from a cybersecurity perspective, because they are essentially like 2-ton cell phones on wheels. They gather up enormous amounts of information, and China has a well-established track record of engaging in epic, historically massive scale cyber espionage and intellectual property theft from all of its adversaries. It does it relentlessly, and it does it to a degree that we've never seen in history. And if you are not comfortable from a national security perspective in allowing Huawei or other Chinese telecom companies to build out your telecom backbone and manage and resupply your 5G or subsequent 6G networks, then why would it be safe to allow Chinese electric vehicles running Chinese software to be connecting with the Canadian grid?
We already know that they pose serious national security risks. And then the question became, is the Canadian government ready for that? Do we actually have guardrails set up specifically to deal with that?
I listened to Minister Champagne just a moment ago talk about eyes wide open. I heard the Prime Minister on multiple occasions say that there will be guardrails to this relationship as we try to amplify trade with China. I never heard anyone specify what they are. Minister, what are the guardrails?
Well, if you look at China, our second largest trading partner, it's very important that we continue to engage with China. A very successful trip. We've been working with them to negotiate agriculture access. In fact, over $7 billion of agriculture access for canola, for seafood, for beef. In fact, our very first shipment of beef is already out there now. Canola's out there as well. And so it's very important that we continue to open up access for our producers, for our workers, but also about EVs. That's very important as well, especially being an MP in Ontario. 3,000 people laid off. Speaking to those workers, they asked me, they just say, we want to build cars. We don't care who we build them for. We just want to build cars. And so this is very important in terms of attracting joint venture opportunities between Chinese and Canadian companies to help build those cars in Canada.
And I appreciate, Minister, the economic case, right, as you lay it out. But my question with respect was about the guardrails that your government is planning to put in place. I know our audience and you will be familiar with the fact that in April, the Prime Minister, in response to a question in the election debate about what is the greatest security threat facing Canada, his answer was China. So the question around guardrails pertains to that. Like, what guardrails is your government going to put in place to help navigate this relationship so that we do not suffer as a result of more trade with China?
So part of the agreements that we signed on the ground in China was law enforcement collaboration to keep our community safe. And so I think that's very important for those watching so they understand, what we're doing there. We're making sure there's partnerships on energy, on agriculture, on consumer goods. But also, of course, public safety and law enforcement is very, very important. We want to make sure that our citizens' safety is never compromised. Going in with eyes wide open, as you said, is very important to our government. But, as the Prime Minister said in Davos, we need to see the world for what it is, not what we wish it to be. And so we need to approach it pragmatically and constructively, and that's what our government is doing.
The general public is not privy to what the leaders of the two countries discussed behind closed doors. However, in the joint official statement released by China, there is some language about cooperation between Canadian law enforcement and China's Ministry of public security. So the statement is framed as cooperation on combating crime. A lot of Canadians might know this. For years, there has been illegal Chinese police stations operating across Canada. They target dissidents and members of the Chinese diaspora because the definition of a criminal is incredibly vague and wide. Under an authoritarian regime, I'm considered a criminal for just criticizing the Chinese government. And this is something that I believe raised a lot of eyebrows within the dissident community and also people who are worried about human rights issues in China.
I had discovered the betrayal by the Canadian government by being delivered a set of videotapes of several hours of interrogation of Tao Mi by an RCMP officer in the presence of a Chinese police officer.
And what went through your mind when you saw those?
Outrage, fear for Tao Mi. I have to say, at the time, I felt ashamed to be a Canadian.